Okay, so I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who will be Troy Williams.
I have to stand when I speak, because I get nervous. God's energy, I get it out of me. But thank you, number one, for lighting us so well up here. I appreciate that. But I'm Troy Williams. I'm the executive director of Equality Utah. And if you're not from the state, we are the state's LGBT political advocacy organization. So I'm up on Capitol Hill lobbying to make sure that LGBT folks are brought into the protections of our state and municipal laws. So that's what I do. I'm also a lifetime Mormon. I grew up in the church in Eugene, Oregon, a very Orthodox family, and I served a mission in England, Bristol mission 20-some years ago. And but I want to speak to you about the urgency and the importance of the work that we do, particularly to bring LDS and LGBTQ communities closer together, and the critical work that we have to do. I worked very closely with the church in 2015 to pass a non-discrimination law. First time in Utah history where LGBT folks were brought into the protections, into the legal fabric of our state. And thanks. And this work is so critically important. So just this past May, my father passed away. And he was 80 years old, and I didn't have a close relationship with him. 6 years ago, my mother passed away from breast cancer, and I didn't have a close relationship with her. And it was because of this divide between the LDS and the LGBTQ community. And I want to preface this by saying that I know that my parents deeply loved me, but they didn't have a language. They didn't have a framework. They didn't have a template for them to reconcile their faith and what their faith taught about homosexuality and the reality of having a gay son. And then to complicate it just a little bit more, I mean, it's one thing for parents to have a gay kid that comes out, but then when you're the parents and you have a gay kid who comes out who's also a gay activist, during Prop 8, it's another level of complication. And so my parents didn't know really how to process this, and so they avoided it and avoided the topic. And they had this staggering, crushing lack of curiosity about my life and my professional life. And every once in a while, though, the AP would do a story, and it would show up in the Eugene newspaper in the Register Guard, and I would be protesting. There'd be a picture of me protesting, and my dad would say, "I saw you in the paper," and then he would change the subject right afterwards because he didn't really want to get into the substance of what I was doing. And so this is a deep regret and a loss for me because my parents have never met any of my wonderful boyfriends. They've never ever heard me give a speech before, and I give lots of speeches. They've never been part of my adult life, and that's really difficult. And I find it challenging because I think had the Mama Dragons been around when my mom was alive, I think it would have changed everything for her. I think she would have found a community and she would have found a voice to be an ally to me. So when I see you today and Mormons Building Bridges and everyone here at Affirmation, it gives me so much hope. And the reason why I say that is because in many senses, my household growing up was kind of gay. My mom's favorite music, and I kid you not, Elvis, ABBA, Liberace, the Village People, and the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And as a kid, we had all the vinyl records. I literally thought that the Village People's song, Go West, was about the Mormon pioneers. And when I got older, I realized that it was basically the gay Come Come Ye Saints, right? Okay? And my dad served in the Navy, which is like the gayest wing of the armed forces, right? You know, so I didn't see why there should be this divide between us. But, you know, it's an issue of generations and age and et cetera. So I think in lots of ways I became an activist to kind of heal this divide. Perhaps if there's any psychotherapists in the audience, you could help me out here. But I think I was trying to fix something in society, in Utah, in the church. But what I really was trying to do is heal these divides between my own family. And it just so happened that in 2015, I was the executive director of Equality Utah. And we had this huge divide over marriage and Prop 8, and it was so much divisions and pain and protests and rallies and us versus them. And we really hit this fever pitch. And then the church kind of came forward and said, you know, look, this is where we stand on marriage. We're not going to change. But we don't believe people should be fired or evicted because they're gay or transgender. So let's work together. And I was nervous about this. I didn't really, you know, I was new to the job. I was used to being kind of like a grassroots organizer and activist and protester with my ripped up jeans, you know, and ripping my fist in the air and marching with a bullhorn. And now I had a suit and tie on again. And working with the church. And all of a sudden I'm in these meetings with Elder Perry and Elder Christofferson and all the church's, government relations folks and their attorneys and my attorneys and sometimes their attorneys and my attorneys. We got into some big ones, all right, trying to work this out. And I was really nervous. I was afraid that in this process, I might fail, that something might happen in the legislation that might harm our community. And so it was with great caution, but also with a tremendous leap of faith that we moved forward. And we did it, I think, by focusing on the things that we shared in common and not on what divided us. So we agreed that marriage, we were never going to be in harmony on that. So we started to work hard on this issue, and we passed this legislation. Now you have to understand that throughout the country, there's never been pro-LGBT legislation that has moved through the state house that's been controlled by Republicans. Utah is the first state to do this. And that's significant. And so I felt, and there was this one moment during this legislative process, and there was a representative who was notoriously anti-gay, and he was trying to make amendments into the legislation that really would have harmed our community. And I remember sitting in this committee hearing, and my stomach was in knots, and all this pain was in my shoulders, and I was just tense, and I was worried. And I got a text message from my mission president, Phil Pugsley, and he said, I'm watching you, I'm rooting for you. And he has never texted me ever before, but he did in that moment. And I was like, okay, we've got this. I'm going to move forward. These father figures in my life keep kind of popping up. And so we passed this legislation. It was historic. There was wonderful celebrations, and I stood next to Elder Perry when the bill was signed, and we fist bumped, and it was cool. And so I called my dad up, and I'm like, Dad, I did this. I passed this bill, and I did it. And I worked with the church, and I worked with the apostles, and we did this. And he was so confused by it. And I did this press conference with Elder Perry, and we shook hands together, and this photo of us went all over the place. And I just hoped in my soul that if that if people picking up the Deseret News saw a picture of Elder Perry shaking hands with this crazy gay activist, that if they had a gay or transgender child, they might feel that they can have a dialogue and shake hands with them as well. And my dad, when I told him all of this, he just kind of changed the subject. And he didn't know how to process it. He didn't have a language for processing it. So we continued on and continued this work. And a few months later, November hits. And I'm in Chicago, and I'm with a bunch of other state leaders of other equality groups. And I'm in a bar in Boys Town in Chicago, and my phone starts buzzing, and it's Fox 13. And I'm like, I'm not answering that. And then KUTV calls me. I'm like, I'm not answering that. Then KSL calls me. And I'm like, oh no, something's happened. And I've had a couple drinks at this point. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I start going online, and I see the policy change for the very first time. And it's raining outside. I just go outside, and I just started crying in the rain because I knew the impact of what this policy would do to so many LDS families with LGBT kids. I knew that so many of my friends, my gay friends, who are part of Mormon families, were going to be ripped apart again. And I know from the church's perspective, for them this is very consistent, right? This is how we feel about marriage. This is our doctrine. This is our belief. But for so many of us in Mormon families who are trying to reconnect to our parents and to our grandparents and our aunts and uncles, this was a huge blow. And when the press called, the only thing that could come to my mind, and I was I was drunk a bit. I just said, churches have the right in America to include or exclude whoever they want. But in our universe, all God's children have a place in the choir. And to me, the issue was, I became more invested in working with the church. That's the moment, right? Because you want to sort of, you feel hurt, you feel betrayed, you feel all of these things. And the impulse is to turn away. And I wanted to suggest to all of you, in these moments, the impulse is to move toward each other, not away from each other. And so in that pain, I sort of recommitted myself to this work and reminded myself that progress is never, ever in a straight line. It swerves around, and there's U-turns, and there's chuck holes, and there's dips. But you got to keep moving forward, regardless of setbacks. And there's always going to be this kind of back and forth. How amazing it was for me last month to be here in Utah County at the Love Loud concert, speaking to 18,000 Mormons about LGBTQ rights. That was a powerful, beautiful moment. And when Dan Reynolds called me up, I'm going to check my time, and he originally told me this idea for a concert, he said he wanted to do it in Salt Lake City. And I said, Dan, no. We got to do it in Utah County. We have to do this in Quorum. We have to do this in Provo. Can we do this? And so we talked about it, and we're like, yeah, this is where the work needs to be done, all right? And so we recommitted to that, and it was this wonderful, powerful, transformative moment. It was so cool that the church came out and endorsed it, and I'm so grateful to them for doing that because it provided permission for people to sort of step forward. And then a couple weeks later, there's an amicus brief filed because over cake, over a bowl of sugar, eggs, and flour. And again, for the church, this is very consistent for them. They don't believe that in same-sex marriage. So it's not inconsistent in their minds to endorse the Love Loud concert one week
And then the next week say, well, if there's a Mormon cake baker, they should have the right to deny service. And so again, from the LGBTQ community, our perspective on this, though, is this back and forth is ripping our families apart. I can't tell you how many of my gay friends call me up and say, I'm not talking to my parents right now. I'm not talking to my brother right now because of these issues. And, you know, I don't know if this tape is making it downtown. And I have these conversations with church leaders all the time, but I'll keep saying it over and over again. We've got to stop this because it's ripping Mormon families apart. And the consequences, as you know too well, are severe. Suicide is the leading cause of death among young people in this state. LGBT kids who are part of non-accepting homes are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight counterparts. So the next legislative work that I engaged in with Equality Utah was to address this issue in public schools. For the past 20 years, we've had a law on the books that public school teachers are prohibited from discussing homosexuality in the classroom. We call it no promo homo. And last October, Equality Utah filed a lawsuit against the Utah State Board of Education to end no promo homo once and for all. And we had 3 amazing plaintiffs. And if you come to my big Allies Gala next week, you're going to meet them for the first time. And the legislature was kind of stunned that we had done this. And Senator Adams, who is the majority whip in the Senate, called me into his office in January. And he said, Troy, I've looked at your lawsuit, and it's not without merit. Let me fix this. So we went to work, and by March, there was a vote. In the Senate, they voted to strike down no promo homo, 24-1. In the House, it was 68-1. Governor Herbert signed it, and in May, no promo homo was history in this state. We want to make sure that young people know that they belong, that they are included, that they are not strangers to the law of this state, and they are not strangers to the curriculum and the rules in our public schools. So, I want to conclude by going back to my dad. March was his 80th birthday, and he passed away the first week of May. And I went to spend time with him on his 80th birthday, and his health was failing. And I knew that this may be the last time I ever saw him again, and it was. And I sat with him before I had to drive back to Portland to catch my plane, and I'm like, this is it. This is maybe the last time I'm going to sit with my dad and have a conversation with him. And we sat down, and he turned on MacGyver. And he has a remote control, and he watched, you know, this show from the 80s, MacGyver, and he turned it up really loud, and I'm sitting there going, this is my last hour with my dad, and we're watching MacGyver, and MacGyver is, you know, stopping a nuclear meltdown with chocolate wrapper, candy wrapper. And it was very surreal. And then the show was over, and my dad turned down the television, and for the first time in our lives together, he brought up the topic. He's never, ever brought up the issue, ever brought up a conversation around gay issues with me, ever, until this moment. And he said, did you know the church changed their policy on the children of same-sex couples? I'm like, yeah. He said, Heavenly Father didn't do that. Heavenly Father didn't do that. And I said, I know. And then he picked up his remote, and he turned it up.
That was the last conversation face-to-face that I had with my dad. And that's all I needed. That's all I ever needed from him.
So I'm asking you, all of you, whatever level of orthodoxy, whatever level of activity you are with the faith, don't give up. Don't give up on the church. Don't give up on the leaders of the church. Don't give up on the members. Keep sharing your souls. Keep sharing your testimonies. Keep opening your heart. Keep the door open. Because the work that we're doing is to save and protect families, is to save and protect the lives of our kids. Let's do it. Thank you so much.